The will to live. When you deeply examine life, one thing becomes clear. Much of it is filled with suffering, with only brief glimpses of happiness. And yet, despite the ongoing pain, we continue to live, driven by something beyond reason, an unquenchable will to live. Philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer saw this will as the fundamental force behind all existence. In the world as will and representation, he described it as a blind, relentless drive that compels all living beings to survive, reproduce, and endure. This force isn't logical, conscious, or purposeful. It simply exists. Schopenhauer wrote that life is guaranteed to the will to live. Thus, it clings to life, even in the worst of conditions. But this will isn't a source of happiness. It is, in fact, the root of suffering. Satisfy one desire, and another quickly replaces it. Escape one pain, and a new one soon arises. According to Schopenhauer, pleasure is brief and illusory, while suffering is constant. He claimed that all satisfaction is merely negative. It only comes from removing a want or pain. This endless struggle is part of nature itself. Life consumes life in an ongoing cycle of survival. In human life, our ambitions often end in emptiness. Unlike animals, we reflect on our suffering, yet we're still trapped by the same will, which only deepens our misery. Being and nothingness. Nothingness, existence, precedes essence. Jean-Paul Sartre's central claim in Being and Nothingness encapsulates his existential philosophy. According to Sartre, humans are not born with a predetermined essence or purpose. Instead, we create our essence through the choices we make and the actions we take. Sartre believes that we are defined not by what we are, but by what we do. Sartre makes a distinction between two modes of being in itself and being for itself. Being in itself refers to inanimate objects, like a chair or a rock that simply exist. They are fixed, unchanging, and unaware. These objects have no ability for self-reflection or transformation. Being for itself, on the other hand, describes human existence. Humans are conscious beings, continuously changing and incomplete. Our identity is shaped by our ability to reflect, choose, and imagine new possibilities. A key idea in Sartre's philosophy is nothingness. Consciousness, he argues, creates a gap between ourselves and the world, a gap that allows humans to envision what could be. This gap gives us the freedom to act and make choices, but this freedom comes with a heavy responsibility. The responsibility to shape our lives and, in turn, humanity. Dysteleological suffering. Imagine a world where suffering has no meaning, no lesson, and no purpose. That's the essence of dysteleological suffering, captured by Richard Dawkins when he wrote, "The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, and no good. Nothing but blind, pitiless indifference." This view holds that suffering is not part of some divine plan or cosmic test. It's just a natural consequence of life's indifferent processes. Predators kill, prey suffers, parasites thrive. It all happens not because it's right or wrong, but because that's how nature works. The term dysteleological combines telos, Greek for purpose, with dys meaning lack or misalignment, pointing to a world where pain serves no higher end. Unlike religious or moral explanations that try to make suffering meaningful, dysteleological thought exposes it as a side effect of chaos, evolution, and survival. Devoid of redemption or reason, hell is other people. It's not the place, it's the company. Jean-Paul Sartre's famous phrase, "hell is other people," captures a deep insight into the nature of human relationships. For Sartre, true torment lies in being under the constant gaze of others. Our sense of self is shaped by how we are seen and judged, often forcing us to see ourselves not as we truly are, but through the distorted lens of others' perceptions. Imagine standing in front of a carnival mirror. No matter how much you try to explain your real appearance, the warped reflection becomes your reality in the eyes of onlookers. Sartre believed this is what it's like to exist around other people. Each look and judgment creates an image of us that may not reflect who we truly are. This experience isn't rare or occasional. It's a core part of being human. Our need for approval traps us in a cycle where we seek recognition, even though it often compromises our authenticity. Sartre argued that being seen by others turns us into objects, stripping us of the freedom to define ourselves on our own terms. Even in our closest relationships, this tension persists. The simple presence of others brings an invisible web of expectations and assumptions, forcing us into roles we may never have freely chosen. For Sartre, this unresolved conflict between the yearning to be acknowledged and the loss of self it brings lies at the heart of the human condition. Abjection? Why does a rotting corpse horrify us? Why do we instinctively recoil from a decaying corpse? Why do we feel so disturbed by things that blur the line between human and inhuman? This deep discomfort comes from a psychological concept called abjection, explored by Julia Kristeva in her book Powers of Horror. Abjection isn't simply fear or disgust. It's a profound unease we experience when something disrupts the boundaries that define our identity. According to Kristeva, our sense of self depends on clear separations: self versus other, life versus death, clean versus unclean. The abject is anything that breaks down these divisions, forcing us to confront aspects of existence we've tried to repress or deny. Bodily fluids like blood, vomit, or pus unsettle us because they blur the line between inside and outside, reminding us of our physical nature, our fragility, and ultimately, our mortality. A corpse, once a living person and now rotting, exists in a disturbing in-between state. Not fully human, yet not entirely other. It forces us to face the reality of death, something we often push aside or avoid thinking about. As philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche put it, God is dead. In a world stripped of comforting absolutes, abjection reveals the raw, unsettling truths we'd rather not see. Being toward death. You are dying, not someday far away, but right now. Every breath, every moment brings you closer to the end. This sobering reality is central to Martin Heidegger's idea of being toward death. For Heidegger, death is not just something that happens eventually. It's a defining feature of existence that shapes how we live today. Death is both certain and unknowable. As Heidegger put it, as soon as man comes to life, he is old enough to die. From the moment we're born, death is already part of us, ever present, yet shrouded in mystery. Unlike any other experience, we can never fully grasp it, and we often choose to avoid thinking about it. Most people, Heidegger said, live in denial of this truth. We lose ourselves in routines, distractions, and societal expectations, what he called living as the they-self. In this state, we adopt the comforting illusion that death is far off and irrelevant. But this avoidance leads to inauthentic living. To live authentically, Heidegger argued, we must face our mortality head-on. This is being toward death, consciously accepting the finite nature of life and letting that awareness guide our actions. When we embrace death, we begin to live with intention. Every decision gains weight. Time becomes meaningful. Life is no longer a blur of passive habits, but a series of choices that reflect who we truly are. And this isn't despair, it's liberation. Understanding our limited time frees us from living for others, for approval, or for empty distractions. It urges us to live for ourselves, fully, deliberately. Heidegger believed that death is the most personal experience imaginable. No one else can die your death. By confronting this truth, you break free from illusions and step into a more honest, purposeful life. Life's value, he insisted, lies in its impermanence. Only by facing death can we truly live. Ego death. Imagine stripping away your job, your memories, even your sense of identity. What remains? Ego death offers a stark answer: the dissolution of the self, where the boundary between you and the world disappears, leaving only pure experience. It's a concept deeply rooted in mystical traditions, Eastern philosophies, and modern psychology. In Buddhism, ego death aligns with the principle of anatta, the belief in no self, which rejects the idea of a fixed, permanent identity. Similarly, Hinduism teaches that the individual self, jiva, is an illusion, and true understanding comes from recognizing unity with Brahman, the ultimate reality. In psychology, Carl Jung explored ego death as part of individuation, the process of integrating the conscious and unconscious mind. This involves dissolving illusions of separateness, confronting the true self, and discovering something far larger than the ego. Ego death is not just a philosophical idea, it's a deeply personal and often intense experience. People report a sense of the I dissolving during meditation, spiritual practice, or psychedelic journeys. Timothy Leary described it as a total transcendence of the self, merging with the infinite. But why would anyone seek such a shattering experience? Because ego death breaks down the illusions we live by: our perceived separateness, our social roles, our fears. What remains is a profound feeling of unity, a clarity that is both freeing and transformative. Still, the process isn't easy. Letting go of the ego can feel like a kind of psychological death, as the self struggles against its own unraveling. But beyond that resistance lies liberation, a release from desires, attachments, and the illusion of a separate self. Saden Nihilism. Nature doesn't care if you're kind or cruel, just or unjust. And this is the unsettling heart of Saden Nihilism, a worldview inspired by the provocative writings of the Marquis de Sade. His philosophy challenges the very foundation of morality, suggesting that it has no basis in nature. At its core, Saden Nihilism rejects the idea of universal moral truths. According to de Sade, values like justice, virtue, and goodness are not timeless truths, but artificial constructs, human-made attempts to impose order on a universe that is inherently indifferent. In Justine, he claims, nature has created us all solely to torment one another. For de Sade, nature is ruled by instinct, survival, and desire, not by moral codes. Humanity, in his eyes, is driven by primal impulses rather than reason or ethics. If morality is just a social invention, he argued, then there's no true obligation to follow its rules. In Philosophy in the Bedroom, he takes this to its extreme. Real freedom, he says, comes from following our natural desires, no matter how taboo or destructive they may be. The shadow. There's a hidden part of you, that you avoid facing, a side you deny or project onto others. Carl Jung called this the shadow. It's always present, quietly shaping your behavior, whether you acknowledge it or not. Jung believed the shadow holds everything we reject about ourselves: dark urges, forbidden desires, and uncomfortable flaws. But it's not purely evil. It also includes any traits that don't fit the image we want to show the world. Often, this suppression begins in childhood, as we try to meet the expectations of family or society. Ironically, the more we push these parts of ourselves away, the more power they gain. Jung warned, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." The shadow can surface in subtle forms: anger disguised as moral judgment, envy masked as criticism, or insecurity shaping our decisions. The process of shadow integration is Jung's solution. It doesn't mean acting on harmful impulses, but rather understanding and accepting them. By confronting the shadow, we move toward individuation, becoming a complete and authentic self. Traits like ambition, passion, or creativity, once repressed, can become sources of strength when brought into the light. The silence of God. A timeless question lingers. If God exists, why does he remain silent, especially during moments of suffering and despair? This isn't a debate over his existence, but rather over his seeming absence when he's needed most. The Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard saw this silence not as abandonment, but as a challenge to faith. He believed true faith is born from tension, the infinite passion of inwardness clashing with the uncertainty of not having clear, objective proof. In this view, God's silence calls for a leap of faith, trusting in the divine without certainty. Thinkers like Simone Weil interpreted the silence differently. For her, God's quiet in times of suffering wasn't a withdrawal, but a deeper invitation to find meaning and transformation through pain. She wrote that Christianity's power lies not in escaping suffering, but in finding a higher purpose within it. Yet a more unsettling possibility remains. What if there is no voice at all? No divine reply? No guiding presence? What if the silence isn't a test or mystery, but simply silence? The illusion of free will. You believe you choose what to eat, what to say, which path to take. But what if that sense of control is just an illusion? What if free will, the foundation of human agency, is simply a story your brain tells after a decision has already been made? Philosopher Baruch Spinoza compared humans to stones rolling down a hill, convinced they control their path only because they're unaware of the forces pushing them. Men think themselves free, he wrote, because they are conscious of their actions but ignorant of the causes. Centuries later, neuroscientist Benjamin Libet conducted experiments showing that the brain begins preparing for actions milliseconds before we become consciously aware of our decisions. That seemingly intentional choice, like picking up a glass of water, was already set in motion by your brain before you thought you made it. Modern thinkers like Sam Harris argue that all decisions emerge from a complex web of prior causes: genetics, upbringing, environment, and unconscious brain activity, none of which we control. You can do what you decide to do, Harris explains, but you cannot decide what you will decide to do. Even the act of weighing options is influenced by hidden processes. Some critics argue that denying free will threatens personal responsibility and moral accountability. But Harris suggests it actually shifts the conversation from blame and punishment to understanding the deeper causes of human behavior. Zeno's Paradox. If you try to walk across a room, it seems simple. Take a few steps, and you're there. But according to the ancient Greek philosopher Zeno of Elea, you might never arrive. His famous paradoxes of motion challenge our most basic assumptions about movement and space. Take his dichotomy paradox. To reach your destination, you must first get halfway there. But before that, you must reach halfway to the halfway point, and so on, infinitely. If each step takes time, how can you ever finish an infinite number of steps? Another famous example is Achilles and the tortoise. Achilles, the fastest runner, gives a tortoise a head start. Every time Achilles reaches where the tortoise was, the tortoise has moved slightly ahead. This continues forever, suggesting Achilles can never catch up. These paradoxes don't claim motion is impossible. Instead, they reveal the tension between physical experience and mathematical reasoning. The Greeks struggled with this puzzle until the development of calculus by Newton and Leibniz, which showed that infinite sequences can add up to finite results. Achilles does catch the tortoise. You do cross the room. Zeno wasn't wrong. His paradoxes highlighted the limits of early mathematics and the infinite complexity hidden within even the simplest actions. Misanthropy. Humanity is often celebrated for its art, science, and capacity for love. But to the misanthrope, mankind appears more like a curse, defined by greed, cruelty, and self-destruction. Is this a harsh reality, or the bleak view of those who see the world too clearly? Misanthropy, the distrust or hatred of humankind, has echoed through time. The ancient philosopher Diogenes wandered Athens with a lantern, claiming to search for an honest man, though he believed none could be found. Later, Arthur Schopenhauer deepened this view, portraying humanity as driven by a blind, selfish will that causes endless suffering. But misanthropy isn't just pessimism. It's a harsh critique of what it means to be human. Misanthropes argue that our capacity for destruction often outweighs our virtues. War, environmental collapse, and systemic injustice point to a species whose intelligence too often amplifies its worst instincts. In this view, misanthropy becomes less about hatred and more about a sobering recognition of human flaws, an unflinching mirror held up to the species we call our own. The problem of other minds. How can you truly know that anyone else is conscious, not just alive, but actually thinking, feeling, and experiencing the world like you do? Whether it's your best friend, family member, or a stranger passing by, how can you be sure they possess an inner world and aren't simply acting as if they do? This is the core of the philosophical problem known as the problem of other minds. A mystery with no clear solution. It arises because consciousness is deeply personal and subjective. You're certain of your own awareness because you directly experience your thoughts and emotions. But when it comes to others, you only see external behavior. A smile might suggest happiness, and tears might point to sadness. Still, these could just be performances, not reflections of real inner states. Philosophers have long wrestled with this dilemma. René Descartes famously declared, "I think, therefore I am," proving his own consciousness. But he admitted he couldn't prove anyone else's. This leaves other minds as an open, unresolvable question. Even today, neuroscience can map brain activity and link it to emotional or cognitive states, but it still can't reveal what it feels like to be someone else. We can see the mechanisms of the brain, but we can't access another person's inner world. And here's the unsettling part. Just as you can't prove others are conscious, they can't prove you are either. From their perspective, You might be the one acting out emotions without any real awareness. This puzzle strikes at the core of how we live. Our sense of morality, our connections with others, and our empathy all depend on believing that others have minds like ours. Despite the uncertainty, we continue to act as though everyone around us is conscious, because imagining otherwise would make the world a deeply isolating place. Appearance versus reality. What if the world you experience, its colors, sounds, even time itself, isn't real, but a carefully constructed illusion? This age-old philosophical tension between appearance and reality challenges our deepest assumptions about perception and truth. Plato explored this in his famous allegory of the cave. In it, prisoners are chained in darkness, seeing only shadows projected on a wall. They believe these shadows are the whole of reality. Plato argued that most people live like these prisoners, mistaking sensory appearances for ultimate truth. To him, real knowledge exists beyond the senses, in a realm of perfect, eternal forms, accessible only through reason. Centuries later, René Descartes pushed this skepticism further in Meditations on First Philosophy. He questioned everything: his senses, his body, even the very existence of the world. What if an evil demon was deceiving him? In the face of such doubt, he found only one certainty: cogito, ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. For Descartes, consciousness itself became the only undeniable reality. Modern science adds new complexity to the debate. Quantum mechanics shows that particles can exist in multiple states until observed. Neuroscience tells us that what we see is a brain-constructed image. Einstein's theory of relativity revealed that time is not fixed, but shaped by gravity and motion. And yet, despite illusions and technologies like virtual reality, we continue to trust our senses. But thinkers like Immanuel Kant remind us that we never experience the world as it truly is, only how it appears to us through the filters of our mind. Antinatalism. Every birth is a roll of the dice, and antinatalism argues that the stakes, life itself, are too high. This philosophical position asserts that bringing someone into existence is inherently harmful, regardless of intentions or circumstances. At the center of modern antinatalism is philosopher David Benatar. In his book, Better Never to Have Been, he presents a stark view: the asymmetry between pleasure and pain. Benatar argues that pain is always bad, and its absence always good, even if no one exists to benefit. In contrast, while pleasure is good, its absence isn't bad, because there's no one around to miss it. In essence, creating life introduces harm. Choosing not to bring someone into existence avoids that harm without depriving anyone. Where most people see life as a precious gift, Benatar sees it as a burden, one inevitably filled with suffering, illness, loss, and death. Yes, life contains joys, but he claims these are often brief and outweighed by pain. Will to power. Friedrich Nietzsche described a powerful concept: the individual who creates their own values, free from the constraints of inherited moral codes. This wasn't a call for cruelty or tyranny. It was a rejection of moral systems that glorify weakness over strength. At the core of Nietzsche's philosophy lies the will to power, a primal force that drives every action, ambition, and desire. This will isn't simply about survival or dominance. It's about the urge to assert, overcome, and create. For Nietzsche, the will to power was the essence of life itself. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he writes, "Where I found the living, there I found the will to power." From plants stretching toward sunlight to humanity's greatest achievements, this inner drive animates all life. Unlike Darwin's idea of survival of the fittest, Nietzsche's concept isn't static. Survival is merely existing. The will to power is dynamic, a force that seeks to transcend limitations, impose meaning on chaos, and expand beyond boundaries. This drive fuels creativity, ambition, and even conflict. Nietzsche believed it was the root of life's transformative energy. But this force isn't only external, it's also an inner struggle. Nietzsche saw self-mastery as the path to becoming the Übermensch, or overman, someone who rises above societal norms and creates their own values. In The Will to Power, Nietzsche wrote, "To impose upon becoming the character of being, that is the supreme will to power." While critics have often misunderstood Nietzsche's message, assuming it promotes tyranny or selfishness, the will to power is not inherently good or evil. It's neutral. Its moral value depends on how we express it through our ambitions, challenges, and creativity. Ultimately, Nietzsche believed life isn't about finding meaning. It's about creating it. The will to power is that inner spark that pushes us to go beyond what is and shape what could be.